Hey everyone, it's OSK. For this video, we gotta talk about balance in Spellbreak and some changes that we need for Spellbreak Chapter 2, which is just around the corner. Now, let me preface this by saying I think Proletariat has actually done a decent job with the balance in Spellbreak for the most part. Not everything is as good as everything else, and probably will never be just due to the nature of trying to balance everything in a multiplayer game, but for the most part, during our Spellbreak gameplay, we're seeing a fair number of people playing every class, every gauntlet, not so much talents, but there are a lot of them to be fair. So this isn't to say that Proletariat has done a bad job with Spellbreak balance, but there are a few issues that I see with the meta in the game, and I just wanted to call attention to it before we go into Chapter 2. Hence, we have this video for 5 Spellbreak balance changes we need for Chapter 2. Now before we get started, if you like this type of video, please be sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe if you'd like to see more Spellbreak content just like this one. And with that out of the way, let's get into this. So, like I said at the start of the video, and in the title for that matter, I'll be giving 5 changes that we need for Spellbreak Chapter 2. The first change that we need to get rid of are the 3 problem talents, Focus Mana, Fervor, and Recklessness. They either need to be removed or heavily nerfed in my view, and it's not necessarily due to them being problems by themselves. The problem with these 3 talents is that their DPS stacks with other damage mods. Focus Mana and Recklessness can stack on each other, and then if you're running a class with a damage mod like Toxicologist or Tempest, then that gets stacked on top as well. The damage mod stacking is a problem all on its own and makes the time to kill in Spellbreak notoriously short in the current iteration of the game with anyone with half decent aim. I say half decent because I somehow can take advantage of this. Now, that's one problem with damage mod stacking, but then you add in Fervor, which is just a flat cast speed buff for the simple price of choosing the talent before you drop into a match. This just exacerbates everything the game does not want. It speeds up time to kill, it lets the damage mod stacking problem get even bigger, and it increases the power of hard to dodge, easy to use spells like Wind and Lightning, which are very prevalent in the game right now. In fact, I would highly recommend you watch a video that I made on the subject. I started a discussion within the Spellbreak community with this, and I think it's worth a watch if you want to go forward with this discussion and don't really have the proper context to engage in it. I will link that in a card at the top right of your screen. Please be sure you click it and give it a watch. Now, as far as what to do with these talents, I would be in favor of simply vaulting them and replacing them with new talents. In other words, remove Focus Mana, Fervor, and Recklessness from the game. If removal is considered too strong in action, here are some nerfs I'd like to see for the problem talents of Spellbreak. For Focus Mana, I think it would be best to revert the talent to its old requirement of needing maximum mana to give increased damage. This would require the player to pay much more attention to their mana usage and make sure not to levitate before a spell is fired, and would be a decent way to curtail the extra damage from the talent without having to really be aware of what you're doing. I would also then reduce the maximum damage available to 20% from 30%. 30% extra damage for your first spell is just a bit too much in my opinion, especially if Toxic, Stone, or Frost are in the conversation. Currently, if you land a fully charged Legendary Frost with full Focus Mana, you hit about 93 damage, which is 21 more damage than the base, and it's almost a full health bar from just one shot. If the opponent has an epic belt in the late game, like with what happens most of the time, that is a 2-shot exile before any other damage mods. That's only from Focus Mana, which is kind of insane. Therefore, I think a nerf to requiring maximum mana and max damage being reduced to 20% would be a fair balance change if not outright removal. For Fervor, I honestly don't see a world where they don't remove this talent. Again, it exacerbates the damage mod problem, and it makes the game unfun by way of buffing Wind and Lightning to absurd degrees. I honestly do not see a healthy way for this thing to exist in the game as it is now. I think outright removal is the solution here. For Recklessness, I actually don't mind the talent too much. I think the requirement to not have any armor is a fairly decent one. It creates this high risk, high reward sort of dynamic in your Spellbreak gameplay, and it takes the place of any talents that typically help you heal or survive longer. I don't like the damage mod being on a talent just due to the fact that you can still stack it with the class skill, but it's easily the least bad offender. I'd either nerf the damage present on the talent slightly, or if you want to be consistent, remove the talent completely. If you remove the talent, it would be just to make sure talents and classes cannot stack damage mods together, which, again, I think is really unhealthy for the game, but if you were to keep it in, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, and maybe a bit of lessened damage would help the current state of things. Overall, I'm in favor for outright removal and replacement of the 3 problem talents, But if you absolutely don't want to move the talents, here are some suggestions that I said before. Except for Fervor, you can get rid of that headache. I will say at the end of this section that we have received recent news about 8 talents being removed from the current selection we have now, and 11 brand new talents will be coming in for Chapter 2, so there is hope for this actually happening. The second change I'd like to see for Spellbreak Chapter 2 would be to adjust some of the class skills that have free value. I went over this concept of free value in my recent response video to another video by Crashy, so please be sure to give that a watch if you haven't already, and I will link that card up in the top right as well. Basically, what I mean by free value is a reward given to the player for little to no effort in return. The 3 class skills I have in mind that affect the meta the most in terms of free value are Potential Energy from Conduit, Squall from Tempest, and Combust from Pyromancer. Each one of these skills provides the player with a class-defining bonus to class power that seems artificial or unearned, and I think that it's time that we do something about it. For Potential Energy of the Conduit class, the current iteration gives each successive bolt of lightning the user casts 1 additional damage up to a maximum of 5. It does not matter if you hit the target or not, as long as you continuously shoot, you will get the damage buff. This is unhealthy for the game, as not only is it extra damage, but lightning itself fires an incredibly fast projectile that is nearly impossible to dodge if the user aims well, and the projectile travels for a very long range as well. The Lightning Gauntlet is one of the easiest ways of dealing damage to your opponent in the entire game, and adding extra damage to that for simply shooting is not a good thing. I think the best way to adjust this would be to reduce the maximum bonus damage cap to 3 and increase Lightning's damage by 1 with each successive hit onto an enemy player. This would reward the player for actually hitting a target, which can be hard to do multiple times in a row under the right circumstances, and I think it would be much healthier. You have to be skillful to get the full damage, seems like a good idea to me. For the Squall skill from Tempest, the current iteration provides a way to get both increased damage and incoming damage reduction simply by being in the air for any amount of time. This means you can simply jump and get the bonuses with no other requirement. This, much like the Potential Energy case, is not a lot of effort for a 20% increased damage, which is ridiculous. I hope I don't need to explain how 20% increased damage for literally nothing is a bad thing for balance. My solution for nerfing Squall would be to simply revert it to its old iteration of requiring the user to be in the air for at least 1 second before the damage buffs come into effect. This basically requires the user to use a wind jump or tornado updraft to gain the increased damage, which is a much bigger investment for the same damage than just tapping the jump button. I have a few ideas for compensation buffs if Squall was reverted. You could extend the duration of your tornadoes as a Tempest, giving more opportunities for updraft or tornado damage. You could increase wind jump's power or range to give Tempest even more movement opportunities. Or lastly, you could give Tempest increased cast speed for the Wind Gauntlet after Fervor gets deleted, so Tempests still feel powerful with their movement, and it would make sense for them thematically. Either way, Squall needs a nerf, and this is one way of doing it. Finally, for Combust, the current iteration increases the explosion radius of fireballs by 200%, making it much easier to hit a target even if you miss. The increased radius of the fireball allows players to hit their enemies even if they miss by about 3 character models, and is unhealthy for the game as a whole. I think the simple fix here is to just delete Combust's increased explosion radius, as it's basically still rewarding you for missing your shots. I think the ignite portion is fine since it rewards you for a direct hit, but the extra explosion radius definitely needs to go. A compensation buff you could go with might be to increase the size of the fireball itself by 50%, so it's easier to hit targets as it flies, but not to reward the players for missed shots. Obviously, it's not the only thing they could do, but the free value gained off of Combust I think needs to be addressed. Overall, I think there are too many things in the game that give free value to players for little to no effort in return, and like the talents mentioned before, these class skills could be addressed as well. For the third change we need for Chapter 2, I think a lot of you aren't going to like it. We need to talk about the Frost Gauntlet. Somehow, this gauntlet has basically defined an entire playstyle by itself as an offhand gauntlet. There are many classes the Frost Gauntlet is viable on. Pyromancer, Toxicologist, Stoneshaper, and Tempest all enjoy Frost as an offhand to cover long-range engagements almost exclusively, and that's not even to mention Frostborn as a class either. In the current patch, Frostborn has the ability to deal well over 60 damage at most rarities without damage mods, and the nature of the gauntlet makes it very difficult to dodge after a shot has been fired unless you use a rune or some kind of defensive maneuver. It's not just the Ice Lance spell either. Frost Sorcery Flash Freeze also gives a very nice defensive option for players to use in a pinch. With Flash Freeze, you're able to block fire, wind, and lightning spells at the perimeter and provide both slow and freeze CCs on the inside. It just provides so many tools in one gauntlet, and it arguably does what it does in terms of both offense and defense better than any gauntlet in the entire game. My solution to fix this would be to leave the sorcery alone, because I really like the idea of having a strong anti-close range option that you can run on a gauntlet. No, I think the simple solution would be to simply nerf the damage of the Ice Lance spell by about 15%. This would bring the max base damage of the legendary Frost Gauntlet down to 61, and this would scale well with the current damage mods that are still in the game. It's overall less damage in the game, which is a good thing in my view. Also, if the damage mod's talents do end up leaving the game like predicted, then that's even better. The fourth change I'd like for Chapter 2 is a nerf to a gauntlet that causes a lot of grief for a lot of people, and of course, I'm talking about the Toxic Gauntlet. It's no surprise at this point the absurdity that everyone sees with the shotgun-themed gauntlet being able to be used at a long range to such an effect that it is. Of course, shotguns can hit targets from fairly far away, so let's please the realists out here, but in terms of gameplay, I don't think that aspect of it fits it very well. It's not just Toxic's wide arc and long range that causes a lot of grief, though. The debuff known as Corrosion is such an oppressive tool as well. Corrosion applies a damage over time effect to armor, dealing 4 damage for 3 ticks. This effect is applied even if you get hit by just one Toxic Stream as well, and it's very obnoxious in the current meta. Given the wide arc and long range that Toxic has, hitting an enemy for at least one Toxic Stream is not hard to do at all, and the reward that it gives you in the form of Corrosion is so great. Corrosion not only acts as a damage source, but also as an information source. Each tick of Corrosion will reveal the enemy's location even through invisibility and behind walls, so Toxic users have an exceptionally easy time tracking down their opponents if they are trying to escape. I believe that for these reasons, we should see significant changes to the Toxic Gauntlet. I have said time and time again on Twitter and in podcasts, and now on this video, I am in favor of reducing the range of the Toxic Gauntlet by at least half, tightening up the width of the spray, and removing Corrosion altogether. I think Corrosion shouldn't be a thing personally, and while it may fit thematically, it is not fun to play against. As for the reduction of range, I think the Toxic Gauntlet should be more focused as a close range damage machine and shouldn't be used at the absurd ranges it is used at now. Tightening the spray of the Toxic Gauntlet should actually help with it at close range as well. A lot of times it can be difficult to get the full value of the Toxic Gauntlet's damage even when within a decently close range. I think that tightening up the cone of the spray should help with close range damage, and while it will require better aim to master completely than its current version, I think the trade-off would be well worth it for the balance of the game. My fifth and final ideal change is not something you'll find in-game, but it is very important nonetheless. This is more of a meta point about the continued development of the game as a whole as we move forward. By far, the biggest and most important change we need for Chapter 2 is more frequent balance changes. We need them. I cannot express this enough. It is not enough to simply fix the immediate problems we have in Spellbreak. As I said in the beginning of the video, achieving perfect balance will probably never happen, so we will need constant changes and iterations for the game to approach a more level playing field, especially when new mechanics and features start to be introduced, like they are hinted to be in Chapter 2. In Chapter 1, we had one mid-patch update for balance-related issues. Just one, in 12 weeks. It fixed a bug that was present in the game since the very beginning of Chapter 1 and slightly adjusted Lightning 7 entire weeks after the chapter was released. That is an eternity in gaming, and at least the bug could have been fixed in the first week or two. Having the same patch to play through for over 2 weeks starts to become stale, and not only will most players move on for a fresher experience, but anything that is strong in the meta will remain strong until there is a patch that changes the state of things, leading to a wide prevalence of whatever is strong for the period of time that the game is not touched. At best, 1 or 2 classes dominate the meta. At worst, we get things like wind offhand spamming and gardening from the Toxic Gauntlet. It is absolutely unacceptable in today's world. Even if balance isn't specifically adjusted, the fact that there is any significant change at all is a way to drive interest for the game. It allows content creators like myself and others, well especially me since I cover the meta and that sort of thing, something to chew on and come back for, which will inevitably result in more players than if there aren't any mid-balance changes at all. Regardless of whatever kind of obstacle is in the way of pushing through updates, and I know that this is something specific with Proletariat because they do have all these platforms to update, it is something that is essential for obvious reasons found through Chapter 1, if nothing else. One could argue, what is the point of changing a perfect patch? But that is a falsehood, to be honest. No patch is perfect, and as evidenced with Chapter 1, people will find the strongest tools to win games eventually, and then the meta will be dominated by those tools. Even if it's small, more frequent mid-patch balance changes will have a huge impact on the player base and the meta as a whole, and we need them sooner rather than later. Well, that is going to do it for 5 Spellbreak balance changes that need to happen for Chapter 2. I hope you all enjoyed the video, maybe even learned something about the current state of the meta and what needs to change. Did you agree with these changes? And what did you think about needing more frequent updates? Do you think more frequent updates is the most important thing Proletary could change about balance? Tell me yes or no and why in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more Spellbreak and other content as well. But anyway, that's going to do it for me. Hope y'all have a great day, and I will see you all out there.